Former President Trump announced today he's going to hold a press conference from Mar-a-Lago on January 6th. If that date rings a bell, of course, January 6th of this year was when a mob of Trump supporters attacked the U.S. Capitol and set off a riot that led to the deaths of 5 people. Critics allege the former president incited the mob, or at least didn't do enough to stop them. During his press conference, the former president is expected to rehash his already debunked claims of mass election fraud, which he blames for losing in 2020. Joining us now, Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union. Good to see you, Matt. Are we going to actually learn anything new in this, you think?
No, it's like the 1-6 commission that Pelosi put together with these Democrats and 2 never-Trump Republicans. We're not learning anything new. Matter of fact, the FBI has already investigated the events around 1-6. They have not found Donald Trump or the White House culpable in the violence, and I think this is just a lot of politics on the Democrats' part.
Well, okay, so if it's a lot of politics on the Democrats' part to have the January 6th commission, is a lot of politics on former President Trump's part to have the January 6th press conference?
No, because, I mean, the commission is basically accusing all of us who support Donald Trump, just like they accused parents of being domestic terrorists. They're accusing all of us of being domestic terrorists. And I remember the Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, no,
I remember the Black Lives Matter violence that
but you think about
occurred throughout the country.
Where Republicans believe there was massive fraud, and you're right, Republicans do. 58% of Republicans believe there was significant fraudulent voting and that those votes changed the election. Significant part of the American population. Only 4% of Democrats, 20% of independents. That's the Axios Ipsos poll. The question would be this. Does President Trump think he's going to, convince people that the election was stolen, therefore he thinks he's going to get more support? What's he hope to get out of this?
I think it's very clear. I mean, you've kept up with the news and Time Magazine and these nonprofits that spent over $500 million in an effort to get people to vote who hadn't voted in the last 3 or 4 election cycles, and to push illegal voting in these ballot containers, which they put all over these 5 or 6 cities. And I happened to go to Las Vegas to investigate the illegal voting, and it was substantial, greater than anything I've seen in my whole life, and I've spent my whole life in politics. If there wasn't a big scheme to do this, why would these rich people spend over $500 million in an attempt to push mail-in ballots that had no signature verification, had no verification that they were on the voter rolls? In Las Vegas, they didn't check the signatures.
I hate to relitigate.
Let me finish.
Okay, I understand. I hate to relitigate. No, I hate to relitigate 2020 all the time. Matt, we hate to relitigate 2020 all the time.
Let me just give you.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me just give you 2 quick answers. I was on the ground in Las Vegas. There were hundreds of thousands of extra votes through the mail. They did not check the signatures. In Georgia, the Secretary of State corruptly and illegally signed a consent decree with Stacey Abrams to not check the signatures on mailed-in ballots. Those were both contrary to the law. We should never vote like that in this country again. It was a substantial number of illegal votes, and you should be able to say you agree. They should follow the law.
Yeah, well, Stacey Abrams was not the governor of Georgia, but I understand what you're getting at. I guess the question is...
She thinks she is.
Looking forward, what does President Trump hope to accomplish with this? Is he gonna convince people that he's right? Because, I don't know, is it 75 federal courts didn't agree with him?
That's not... Let me tell you, I was involved in several of those court cases. Well, I'm going to put that to the side. What do we hope to get accomplished generally is to have people follow the law on voting, to follow the law on voter ID, and to not allow the new Socialist Democratic Party to act like voter ID is somehow a racist concept. And specifically on the 1-6 commission, over almost 50 subpoenas. People are going in front of this committee. They're having their phone records turned over to the federal government. They're having their banking records turned over to the federal government. They're having their whole lives destroyed for one thing, supporting Donald Trump. This nation is very split politically. I don't think it should be a crime for half the country to support the person that they want to be the president of the United States. But that's what the Democrats are doing. That's what he's going to call out.
Yeah, no, there's no argument there. And if what you're saying is that the former president is there to sort of rally support for his troops, if you will, or his supporters a year later, okay, point taken. You have to look at this always in the context of the next election. Hypothetical 2024 matchup, if President Trump doesn't run, and I won't put you on the spot and ask you because so many other people have asked you if he will or not.
Feel free
Ron DeSantis, 30%, Mike Pence, 25%, Ted Cruz, 13%, goes down from there. Ron DeSantis, 30%. Interestingly enough, we call this segment Things Politicians Do When They Might Be Considering Running for President. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says he wants to create a new investigative unit to enforce election laws. It's believed to be the first of its kind in any state. The unit would have 45 investigators, a $6 million budget, and look into violations of state election law and election irregularities. And DeSantis says the office is needed because authorities aren't doing enough to prosecute election crimes. He was the governor in 2020, so did he preside over a bad election in 2020 in Florida?
Well, it's an amazing thing that there's a little truth in politics. There's always a certain amount of illegal voting in absolutely every election. Out of nowhere, all of a sudden,
Matt, we do this show from Chicago. We understand that.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently, Bob Dole's going to be voting in Chicago per his note to the American people. But the point is this, which is we should all be able to agree with this. Both parties should agree with this. We should try to root out all crimes around voting that we possibly can. And what Ron DeSantis did when he came into office is he got rid of a election superintendent who had overseen a lot of illegal voting. And what the president is doing is trying to remind all of us that we should simply follow the rules on voting. Those people who don't like Donald Trump can vilify him for that. But the fact is that a majority of Americans believe there was a lot of wrongdoing. And when you read about the $500 million in Zuckerbucks and these other corrupt spending to try to get illegal people to vote, I think that shows clearly what they tried to do. There was a lot of Trump hatred across the country, but it doesn't justify taking illegal ballots and jamming them in boxes. It just doesn't validate it. And I think the American people believe that happened.
Well, certainly 58% of Republicans do, 20% of independents do. At least that's the poll. Democrats don't. Hey, Matt, do me a favor, and that is we're booking you for January 6th. You're going to come join us after the Trump press conference. We can't wait. Thanks for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.